The golden child of tennis has officially shattered. We are witnessing the raw, public dismantling of Mirra Andreeva. At just 18 years old, the girl touted as the future of the sport didn't just lose a tennis match. She suffered a total psychological fracture in front of thousands of people. The world watched in horror as she screamed obscenities at the fans and smashed her equipment into splinters. But this wasn't just a bad day at the office. This was a cry for help from a teenager who has been pushed past the point of no return. The villain in this story isn't the girl holding the racket, it is the corporate machine that handed it to her and told her she wasn't allowed to stop swinging. The facts of the Indian Wells disaster are undeniable. Andreeva was the defending champion. She had everything to lose. As the match against Aryna slipped away, the mask of the composed prodigy didn't just slip, it was ripped off. The reality is that Mirra was hitting herself. She was slapping her own face and thighs in a desperate attempt to wake up from a nightmare. When she couldn't find her rhythm, she turned on the people closest to her. She ordered her own coaching team to leave the court. She wanted to be alone in her suffering, but the WTA wouldn't let her be alone. They needed her on that court for the cameras. They needed the content. The breaking point came after the final point was played. Most players offer a polite handshake and walk away. Mirra Andreeva chose a different path. She looked at the crowd, the very people who pay her salary, and screamed, "Fuck you all," multiple times. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated rage. She later claimed she was talking to herself, but the footage tells a different story. Her eyes were fixed on the stands. She was lashing out at a world that expects her to be a machine. The psychological pressure of defending 2,000 ranking points while navigating a toxic tour schedule finally caused a total mental OD of expectations. But why did this happen now? To understand the meltdown, you have to look at the WTA Playbook. The documents prove that the tour has moved toward a model of maximum engagement. This means more mandatory 1,000 level events. It means longer tournaments that stretch over 2 weeks, leaving players with zero time to recover. The WTA executives, led by Steve Simon, have ignored every warning sign. They ignored the tears. They ignored the injuries. They only care about the bottom line. Mirra Andreeva is just the latest victim of a system that views teenage girls as disposable assets. The meltdown in the desert was the inevitable result of systemic burnout. We tracked Mirra's schedule over the last 12 months. She has been playing almost non-stop since she was 16. The WTA's age eligibility rules were supposed to protect her. In reality, they just delayed the inevitable. Once she turned 18, the floodgates opened. The tour demanded she show up at every mandatory event or face massive fines. The reality is that the WTA uses points penalties to keep their stars in line. If Mirra skips a tournament to save her mental health, her ranking drops. If her ranking drops, her sponsors walk away. It is a corporate cage with no exit. The industry is in a state of shock, but they shouldn't be. The warning signs were everywhere. Just weeks before this, world number 1 Aryna Sabalenka called the schedule insane. She literally told the press she was prepared to pay fines just to stay sane. Swiatek echoed these sentiments, calling the mandatory rules pretty crazy. When the 2 best players in the world are telling you the system is broken, you listen. But Steve Simon didn't listen. He doubled down. He kept the heavy balls in play that are destroying players' wrists. He kept the 11-month season that leaves no room for a soul to breathe. What happened to Mirra at Indian Wells was a procedural failure of the highest order. The WTA claims to have athlete assistance programs for mental health. They have rookie hours where they teach teenagers how to handle the media. But you can't media train your way out of a nervous breakdown. You can't use a wellness app to fix the fact that you haven't slept in your own bed for 6 months. The documents prove that WTA spends more on marketing their stars than they do on actually protecting them. They sold Mirra Andreeva as a product, and now that the product is broken, they don't know what to do. The villain's lies are starting to unravel. For years, the WTA has framed the grueling schedule as growing the game. They say the fans want more tennis. They say the players want more money. But the money isn't going to the players. It's going into the pockets of the executives who negotiate these insane deals. The reality is that the WTA is facing a financial crisis. They're desperate for cash, which is why they're selling out to anyone with a checkbook. They're forcing their players to perform like circus animals to keep the broadcast partners happy. The evidence of the WTA Playbook is hidden in the fine print of the rulebook. Look at the mandatory tournament clauses. If a top 10 player misses a WTA 1000 event without a valid medical excuse, they're hit with a 0-pointer that stays on their ranking for a full year. This is the weapon the WTA uses to force teenagers onto the court. Mirra Andreeva knew she didn't show up to defend her title. Her career would take a massive hit. She chose to play while mentally exhausted, and the result was a public humiliation that will haunt her for years. The meltdown wasn't just about the tennis. It was about the physiological stress markers that the WTA chooses to ignore. Scientists have proven that high-level athletes under constant stress lose their ability to regulate emotions. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for tactical composure, literally shuts down. Mirra wasn't being a diva. Her brain was in survival mode. She was fighting a fight-or-flight response on live television. The WTA executives saw this happening in real time and did nothing to intervene. They just let the cameras roll. The fallout from the Siniakova match has been devastating. The villain's reputation is in a freefall. Steve Simon can no longer pretend that the insane schedule is sustainable. The industry is distancing itself from the current leadership. Agents are reportedly advising their players to ignore the rules and take the fines. The hero of this story, Mirra Andreeva, has been left to pick up the pieces of her shattered image. She had to stand in front of the press and apologize for emotions that weren't even her fault. She's being forced to take the blame for a system that failed her. But the facts don't lie. The WTA's own reports show an unprecedented spike in mid-match retirements and mental health breaks. The tour is literally falling apart. Players are walking onto the court sick, injured, and off mentally before the first serve is even hit. The reality is that the WTA has created a culture of fear. If you speak out, you're labeled as difficult. If you cry, you're unstable. Mirra Andreeva didn't just have a meltdown, she exposed the lie that everything is okay in women's tennis. The systemic implications are clear. The WTA has weaponized the precocious talent of girls like Mirra. They use them to sell tickets, and then they discard them when they break. We have seen this playbook before with countless other prodigies. The pattern is always the same: a meteoric rise, a grueling schedule, and a spectacular public collapse. The only difference is that now the players are starting to fight back. The Andreeva investigation has become a rallying cry for a player union that actually cares about the humans behind the rackets. The villain thought they could control the narrative. They thought they could frame Mirra as a wild teenager who just needs to grow up. But the fans aren't buying it. We see the heavy balls. We see the 11 a.m. finishes. We see the insane travel from Dubai to California with 0 days of acclimation. The documents prove that the WTA's schedule is geographically anti-logic. It is designed to maximize ticket sales, not to protect the athletes. They're flying these girls across the planet like cargo, and then they wonder why they snap on court. Mirra's calculated lie was the apology she had to give. She said she was not proud of how she managed it, but she shouldn't be proud. She should be angry. She should be demanding to know why she was forced to play through a psychological fracture. The reality is that the WTA has no plan for when a star breaks. They only have a plan for how to replace them. They are already looking for the next 15-year-olds they can exploit. They're already drafting the next set of mandatory rules to keep the cycle going. The downfall of the WTA's current era is now inevitable. You cannot build a billion-dollar industry on the backs of exhausted children. The Mirra Andreeva meltdown is the crack in the foundation that will eventually bring the whole building down. Steve Simon and his board of directors have lost the locker room. They have lost the trust of the players. And most importantly, they have lost the trust of the fans. We don't want to watch our heroes suffer a mental OD on court. We want to watch great tennis played by healthy people. The investigation into the WTA's insane schedule proves that the WTA is prioritizing short-term profit over long-term sustainability. They're burning through their most valuable assets at a record pace. Mirra Andreeva's career is now in a state of uncertainty. She was the golden child, and now she's a cautionary tale. The villain's greed has turned a once-in-a-generation talent into a headline about meltdowns and explosions. The reality is that the system didn't just break Mirra, it tried to destroy her. But Mirra is a fighter. The hero is still standing, even if she is bruised. The true meltdown is happening in the WTA offices. They're scrambling to do damage control. They're sending out wellness newsletters and pretending to care, but the documents don't lie. The rules haven't changed. The schedule is still insane. The fines are still being issued. The meat grinder is still turning. The only thing that has changed is that the world finally knows the truth. The era of corporate tennis is coming to a violent end. The players are realizing that they have the power. If they all decide to skip the mandatory events, the WTA has no product to sell. If they all decide to ignore the point penalties, the villain has no leverage. The Andreeva incident was the spark that lit the fuse. The fire is now spreading across the tour. From Sabalenka to Swiatek, the message is clear. The players will no longer be sacrificed for the sake of a broadcast deal. The final verdict is damning. The WTA executives thought they could hide their procedural failures behind the smiles of teenage prodigies. They thought they could silence the hero with ranking points and prize money. But you cannot buy a soul once it has been broken. Mirra Andreeva's outburst wasn't a failure of character, it was a triumph of the human spirit. She finally showed the world what the insane schedule actually feels like. She showed the world the shit that goes on behind the scenes. Steve Simon thought he'd destroy Mirra Andreeva's reputation to save his tour, but he only destroyed himself.